Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Big Brother 27 towards the end of week 3, which was another somewhat interesting week where I feel like there was a lot of setup to stuff that could be happening in future weeks, some potentially bigger moves happening. And with that, I feel like the stock that I have in certain players has changed a bit compared to last week, but we'll let that soon enough. Now I'm recording this on Tuesday, July 29th, and if you're new to the channel or if you only follow the show through the televised episodes, I will be discussing the events of the live feeds, and in doing so, I will be spoiling both the veto winner and the results of the veto meeting, so if you don't want to be spoiling that stuff, this is probably not the video for you. But with that out of the way, we have 16 people to talk about, and let's waste some more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 16, we have the latest boot from the season, and here we have Amy. And again, Amy going out here makes a lot of sense. She was clearly the target by the time she was going out here, and unless she won the blockbuster, which was pretty unlikely, she was probably being voted out here. Though I will also say that was interesting that she was voted out unanimously here, the first person to be voted out unanimously in the post-AI arena format. And also broke the record for most eviction votes in a season, which I wasn't fully expecting, but here we are. And again, I feel like Amy is a pretty bad player. She was someone who I was pretty low on in the preseason, someone who was pretty easily put up on the block initially. And while it was interesting seeing her being saved in week 1, she was just thrown back up in week 2. And while it wasn't in the best interest of Jimmy to do so, I feel like that further speaks to how Amy wasn't able to convince Jimmy to do something that was in his best interest there. So I feel like at the end of the day, I feel like Amy is someone who I wasn't expecting too much out of the season, and even by the time she went out, I feel like she played somewhat poorly, even though not as poorly as certain other players on the season, but she's now out of the game to where she's here at number 16. And with that, we have 15 people left in the game to talk about. As usual, upper ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based on their current game position. But number 15, we have the person who I think is the most likely to go out, even though I feel like any one of the nominees are likely to go out at this point. But number 15, we do have Kelly, and really the reason Kelly's at the bottom is I feel like she did the most actively wrong of the people currently on the block, to where she just volunteers for the block again, which is pretty insane by itself. And on top of that, you have Vince, one of her closest allies, even suggesting that Kelly go up as a pawn. So I feel like all that's pretty bad. And you can very much tell that Kelly is inspired by Tucker from BB26 through her volunteering for the block and her just thinking that she can win all these competitions and check out the game that way, when that's bad gameplay. So I feel like that's obviously something to mention. And on top of that, I feel like she has a pretty good shot going home unless she wins the BB Blockbuster, which to be fair, I mean, she is the most accomplished competitor out of the people on the block right now. But at the same time, I feel like if she's still there on eviction night, she's probably a goner at this point. And while there is talk about the likes of Adrian or Will going out, I feel like considering that Kelly did so much actively bad to cause her nomination here, I feel like that alone was enough to have her at the very bottom here, to where she's here at number 15. Now moving on to number 14, and we have someone who is once again safe for the week, even though I still feel like they're a pretty bad player, and here we have Keanu. And again, I feel like Keanu has continued to demonstrate just how bad of a player he is, where once again, he was considered the initial target when Lauren put him up, despite not even being in Lauren's best interest to do so, where I feel like Lauren should not have been putting up Keanu in this spot, and he probably would have gone out once again this week had he not won the veto, but he ended up winning the veto there, so that's something at least. And on top of that, you have a lot of people in the house blaming him for Lauren putting up Adrian as the renom here, which is funny considering that Keanu was actually pushing for Ashley to go up instead, and part of his strategy was to take the heat for Lauren putting up Ashley, but despite him not even getting his way and actually going up, he still ended up taking the fall for it, which is pretty funny there. So I feel like Keanu is still not in that great of a spot here. And I think through this week, he is just such a chaotic player and someone who I just have no faith in as an actual player here. Now, I do think there is some reasons for him to be higher this week where, for one, he did at least repair his relationship with Rachel, and with there being more talk about targeting Vince, and with Keanu making his target so big that's invisible, I think there's definitely an argument for Keanu being higher, as I feel like the fact that he's now somewhat working with Rachel, and with there also being more talk about going after some of these bigger players in the house as opposed to these easy targets, you could argue that his strategy of making his target so big that it's invisible is working. But at the same time, I just have no faith in Keanu as a player, where even with these positives, I feel like Keanu is still someone who's going to sabotage those opportunities, where even with his whole scheme of him like going under the radar and making himself so big that he's invisible, I feel like he's someone who just has to be at the center of attention at all times, to where I feel like he'll just continue to be a target anyway. So even though there is less of a chance now that he'll be targeted in the future due to these minor positives, I feel like Keanu has continued to show some very sloppy gameplay. And I feel like even if he's not the target in the future, he'll at the very least be used as a pawn moving forward. And there is still a shot that he could go home through that. So I feel like Keanu is still in a pretty precarious spot. And I feel like he's a pretty bad player. Tori's here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and we're going back now to someone who's currently on the block and could go home on Thursday night. But number 13, we do have Adrian. And it is kind of funny how Adrian ended up on the block here, as Lauren had spent so much of the Sunday talking about how she was going to put up Ashley, only for her to seemingly change her mind to Adrian at the last moment here. And again, I do find it a bit unfortunate that Adrian ended up on the block here. Though with that said, I still feel like he did some things wrong with this week, where I feel like he is still someone who talks about how loyal a player he is, which you can see why he would do that. But I feel like considering that he is associated with Keanu and Kelly, I feel like that leads to a lot of people in the house not feeling like he is that good of a number there. So I feel like that's not particularly great. Also, the fact that he did seem to share a bit too much information with Zach, and that spreading around the house is also causing certain people to not really trust him. And I just feel like Adrian is just not in that good of a position to begin with, mixing the fact that he is on the block at this point. And yes, while he could win the BB Blockbuster, as he ended up winning the Blockbuster last week, he's obviously going up against Kelly, someone who is a bit tougher competition compared to Amy from last week. And while there is also talk about how he could stay over Will, I feel like that's not fully secure at this point, as Lauren talked about how she doesn't want it to be a tie. So I feel like Adrian's kind of in a weird spot at this point, where on one hand, I don't think he's for sure going home, even though it does seem like he is the target at this point. But on the other hand, I feel like there's enough negatives as well, mixing the fact that there is still that possibility that goes out, especially if Kelly ends up winning the BB Blockbuster, that I'm not feeling too great about Adrian's chances at this current point. And even if he does survive this week, I feel like he is already not in a good spot and could just as easily be used as a perpetual pawn in the future. Tori's here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have the final person that is currently on the block, and here we have Will. And it is funny how I had Will so high last week, even though I did say that a lot of the people around him were very close and he just happened to eke it out. I still feel like it was funny that I had him so high last week, only for him to drop to number 12 this week. And I do feel like Will's someone who didn't really do that much across this week. And obviously that's a problem considering that he once again ends up going up on the block here. Doesn't really do much before the nominations to ensure his nomination there. And while he did get very upset afterwards that made Lauren regret that nomination, it makes you wonder why he didn't just put up that stink beforehand and avoid this whole mess. So I feel like that's not particularly great there. And I think Lauren putting him up at all is even worse considering that they were supposed to be in an alliance in the bond. And while that wasn't that solid of a group, the fact that Lauren still put him up despite them being in that grouping is pretty bad. So obviously that's not particularly great here. And again, beyond his post-nomination antics, I feel like Will didn't really play this week particularly well. And there's still a shot that he goes out this week where there is talk about how there are people like Catherine, Keanu, Riley, Vince, and Zach, all of whom would decide to keep Adrian over Will in certain situations. And obviously that's not particularly great. And the fact that Lauren is even open to allowing this tie to take place is also not good. So I feel like Will is someone who has really let the ball drop this week. He is on the block at this point. Even if he does survive this week, he is in that spot now to where he could be this perpetual pawn. And again, there is a shot that he doesn't even make it to next week. So I feel like there's enough negatives with Will at this point to where I do have him here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, we are going now to someone who was pretty low last week, and they're still pretty low this week. But number 11, we do have Catherine. And I feel like the fact that Catherine is so low this week, despite Lauren winning HOH, is a pretty bad sign for her, as I feel like Catherine should have benefited greatly from a Lauren HOH and should have had a decent amount of influence within said HOH. But instead, she once again doesn't really do that much, where she doesn't really fight to get her way, where she had wanted Ashley to go up, doesn't really push to get that, and doesn't even get that outcome to begin with. And I feel like had Ashley gone up, that would have been pretty good for Catherine's position. But instead, I feel like she plays this week pretty passively and is still not in that great of a spot to where she doesn't really have Jimmy at this point. She kind of has Lauren, but again, she doesn't really have much influence across her HOH and is still being talked about as a potential target in the future. So I feel like those things are all pretty bad. And I feel like with Catherine not really doing much to improve her position across this week, I still have her relatively low here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we are going now to someone who was fairly high last week, but I feel like they have really dropped off this week. But number 10, we do have Vince. And Vince has really dropped off here to where he is now a pretty big target in the house, where a lot of people are talking about targeting him. And a lot of it's stemming from his own bad work, where he ends up really latching onto Lauren across his HOH here, really spending all of his time with Lauren and talking with her to the point where people are assuming that Vince and Lauren are this tight duo and that Vince is essentially running Lauren's HOH. And while Vince does have a final two with Lauren, I feel like Vince doesn't really do much to influence Lauren's HOH, where he spends a lot of the week wanting Ashley to go up, but makes very little effort in convincing Lauren to do so, and even does stuff against that, where Lauren actually did consider putting up Ashley at a point, but Vince doesn't really do much to ensure that that goes through, and he doesn't even get his way by the end of that. Not to mention the fact that he is once again willing to let Kelly go up on the block and talks a lot about how he wants Kelly to volunteer for the block, which is also pretty bad. Just really letting go of Kelly despite Kelly being loyal to him. And again, the fact that Vince is getting all the heat for the decisions that Lauren made across his HOH, despite him not actually controlling Lauren's HOH, is all really bad. And at this point, he is becoming a pretty big target in the house, where the likes of Rachel are clocking him. And with Rachel getting a bit more traction with people like Keanu, and with Mickey and Morgan also picking up on Vince, I feel like Vince's position has really deteriorated across this week. But I feel like, for one, it shows that he doesn't have a lot of agency in the game, where despite him having like these clear goals, he does almost nothing to enact that, and is just completely unwilling to wield any influence that he has in the game over the likes of Lauren, for instance. But also the fact that people are trying to clock him, and also that he is being talked about as a pretty big target for the coming weeks. I'm not feeling that great about Vince at this current point, which is why he's here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and this is someone who probably should not be this high, but after the veto meeting, they are. By number 9, we do have Ashley, and Ashley was so close to going home this week, where she was so close to going up on the block in a position to where she goes home here, but instead she doesn't. And I do find that pretty funny here. I literally woke up on Monday morning thinking that Ashley was going to be the renom, only for Lauren to change her mind at the last moment here. So I do feel like that is kind of a weird thing to point out here. Now, I do think Ashley, even before that, was still not in the greatest spot, where she was constantly talked about as a nomination across a lot of the week, where so many people like Vince were really pushing for Ashley to go up on the block here, but due to them not really pushing that hard to get the result, it results in Lauren not going up here. And at the same time, you had Lauren being super indecisive as well, to where she came out of the veto competition being all gung-ho and wanting Ashley to go up, but ends up really wavering there and eventually backs out of it. So I do feel like Ashley really gets lucky that she's surrounded by a lot of these really passive people. Though, to be fair, she does also do some good work in campaigning to Lauren and convincing her to not put her up. So I do feel like she does get a little bit of credit for that, but it's just the fact that she was so close to going up and would have gone out had she gone up there that makes it hard for me to have her too much higher here. Not to mention the fact that she still could be a target in future weeks, if this war breaks out between these two sides of the house here. So I'm not feeling the greatest about Ashley, and I still think she has many shortcomings as a player. But I feel like it's the fact that she at least survives the week by the skin of her teeth was enough to have her here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have someone who I just don't have much to say about. By number 8, we do have Riley, who is actually remaining around the same spot compared to last week here. And honestly, there is an argument for him being a little bit lower here, considering that his side does end up losing the battle here. He doesn't really get his way, where he wanted Ashley to go up and wants to target the other side of the house, but doesn't really get that by the end of the week. Beyond that, he doesn't really do much across this week, just is acting like he's on vacation pretty much. And again, there really isn't much to say about Riley at this current point. Not much good, not much bad. Now, I can say that there is the argument that he could improve his position if his side ends up winning power, but at the same time, he is such a passive player, and I feel like there really isn't that much to say about him at this current point, so he's still here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and this is someone who I was also expecting to be lower this week, though after thinking about it and after ranking everyone, I feel like they kind of belong here. By number 7, we do have Jimmy. And again, I feel like there's still some pretty big negatives with Jimmy. I still feel like he is somewhat of a big target in the house, where I feel like he would be targeted under certain situations here. Beyond that, I feel like this week also demonstrated just how bad his HOH was, where he doesn't really have that many close connections at this point, where he ends up dropping his relationships with Catherine and Lauren across this week, where he had been trying to get in with them to replace Mickey and Morgan, but doesn't really get much traction there. At the same time, he's not as close to Mickey and Morgan as he once was. And again, I feel like he's someone who didn't really get what he really wanted last week. And I still think there are situations where he could be targeted in the near future. However, I do think there are some positives with Jimmy that do leave him a bit higher for me. Where for one, I feel like Mickey and Morgan are now bigger targets at this point, and there's definitely a world where he could skate through because of that. And also, I think the bigger thing to point out is that he does technically get his way this week, where he does at least make a good pitch to Lauren, convincing her to put up Adrian over Ashley, even promising Lauren's safety from his side of the house. So I feel like the fact that Jimmy does effectively get his way and is actually one of the few people that is somewhat effective in campaigning to Lauren and getting what he wants is all pretty good in my eyes. And I feel like that alone is a major reason why he's at least this high on the list. But at the same time, I still feel like there are many issues with Jimmy's game. I feel like this week just highlighted just how bad his HOH reign was. And I still think there's a world where he could be targeted in the future. But at the same time, I feel like that pro of keeping Ashley off the block was enough to have him here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we're moving on now to the current HOH, and here we have Lauren. Now, do I think Lauren played well this week? Absolutely not. Did this week lower my view of Lauren as a player? Yes, it did. Though with that said, I feel like Lauren's placement on this list is more so due to her short-term position, where I still feel like she is pretty safe in the game, where despite her coming out of this HOH, not looking the greatest, I feel like she's not really being targeted by anyone in the house, and I feel like she is someone who will at least be included on plans moving forward, even though I feel like she's not really respected in the house, where I feel like this week just further confirmed to me that she's not really viewed as that big of a threat by a lot of people, where so many people assumed coming to the week that other people would end up running her HOH, and we eventually see that people assume that Vince is responsible for all our decisions, which I feel like while that does take the heat off her and puts it on Vince, it also means that people just don't take Lauren that seriously. And I think Lauren herself does absolutely no favors in helping that perception, where she ends up coming off so indecisive and so wishy-washy and just telling people to tell her what to do across this week that really lowers her standing in the house. And I feel like it'll be very hard for her to be taken seriously moving forward. And I feel like even if she does eventually get to the end, that she will struggle to garner respect by a lot of people. So I feel like those things are all pretty bad. Not to mention that her actual nominations are pretty bad as well, where she ends up putting up Will, despite them being part of the bond. That's pretty bad. She also is someone who should have put up Ashley the whole time, but just never did. And despite her having the opportunity to rectify that after Kiana won the veto, she still backed out of it, despite her telling people earlier on Sunday that she was going to put up Ashley, but changes her mind. So I feel like Lauren is someone who really comes out this week not looking the greatest in the world. And the reason she's as high is, one, I feel like I have bigger issues with other people, but also she is technically safe moving forward. I feel like that's something, but really I feel like she played this HOH pretty poorly, and I feel like she didn't come off the greatest either, which is why she's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have someone who has gone up quite a bit compared to last week, as I feel like their position has improved a good amount. But number 5, we do have Rachel Riley, and I feel like this was a pretty good week for Rachel, all things considered, where we saw her really shoring up her final 2 with Ava. I feel like that's a pretty good connection for her to have. She also has seemingly rectified things with Keanu to where Keanu's not really going after her at this point. And I feel like with Ashley staying off the block here, I feel like that also improves Rachel's position, as it really allows her side to come into the next week in a better position than they probably should have. So I feel like those things are all pretty good. I also think that with the likes of Mickey and Morgan becoming bigger targets compared to Rachel, that'll also keep her relatively safe. I do feel like there are definitely some positives to Rachel's game here, and also the fact that she is clocking Vince and talking about targeting him. And with there being more people in the house, I want to target Vince at this point. I think that's another pro you can give Rachel. So I do feel like there's a lot of things to say positively about Rachel, though I think her issue is win equity. I feel like at this point, it's just going to be very hard for Rachel to actually win the game at the very end. And I feel like even though she did improve her position a good amount, and I feel like she's probably safer in the house than some people are about to be talking about, I feel like the fact that she doesn't seem likely to win even if she gets towards the end, and you're going to make the argument that people are keeping her around because she can't win at the end, I feel like those things are enough to where I can't have her that high, as I feel like she's pretty unlikely to actually win. But at the end of the day, I feel like this was still a net positive for Rachel by the end of the week, to where she's here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and I'll be honest, I'm still not entirely sure about these two placements here, though at the end of the day, I feel like this week is definitely better for them now than what it could have been. But number 4, we do have Morgan. And again, Morgan along with the next person are all people who I feel like are probably in worse positions now than they were last week, where I feel like there's more talk now about Mickey and Morgan as the targets in the house that should be dealt with. Not to mention the fact that Ashley was so close to going up in the block that really would have damaged Morgan's position moving forward. And the fact that Morgan is at least being talked about as a potential target as well, those things are not particularly great in my eyes. And I feel like Morgan's probably in a worse position now than what she was before, but still not as bad as what it could have been. So I feel like those things were enough to where I still feel fine about Morgan for the time being, even though I still feel like her position is definitely weaker now and could definitely turn around based on who wins HOH in the following week. But for now, I think considering where things are at, I'm still going to have her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have someone who I just mentioned, but we do have Mickey. And again, similar to Morgan, I feel like Mickey's position is definitely worse now than what it was before, where I feel like more people are talking about how Mickey's running the game, and through that there is talk about potentially targeting Mickey. And I think had Ashley gone up this week and gone out, that would have been pretty disastrous for Mickey's position, as I feel like it would have opened her up to be targeted as soon as next week. And while I still think that concern is there to where I do think there are people that are talking about putting her up, the likes of Adrian and Riley, for instance, I think the fact that Ashley's still there as a number and also someone who could go up over Mickey, I think those things were just enough to where I feel like Mickey's still in an okay spot for the time being. Though I think we are definitely starting to see more people talking about targeting her. And I think there is actually an argument for Mickey being below Morgan, as I feel like Mickey is being more targeted than Morgan, where I feel like Mickey would be targeted before Morgan. However, the reason I went with Mickey above is I feel like Mickey's a lot better socially compared to Morgan, where I'll be honest, I feel like Morgan is definitely showing like some pretty poor social play at points, even though I think Morgan's probably better strategically compared to Mickey. But I feel like considering that Mickey's a bit better socially and could potentially recover a bit better than Morgan, I feel like that was enough to give her the edge for me, even though I feel like they both suffered some blows to their position compared to last week, to where I do have Mickey here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and we actually have the same person at number 2 compared to last week, and that person is Zach. And I feel like Zach is, for the most part, still in a pretty good spot here. However, I also think that he didn't really get his way this week, where he really was pushing to get Ashley up, but doesn't really do that much to get Lauren on board with the plan. And I feel like he didn't really show much activeness in doing so, which I do feel like is a pretty big problem. And I think with Adrian going up, that takes away someone else who is willing to work with him. I do feel like this was a net negative for Zach in terms of not getting his way and Ashley going up. I feel like Ashley going out would have been extremely beneficial to Zach, even though I still feel like he's in a pretty good spot at this point. Though the reason I did drop him is I feel like he didn't really show much urgency in getting Ashley up on the block to begin with, where I feel like there was very much a push to do so had he wanted it. But I feel like considering that he didn't, I feel like that does make me a bit worried over how active he is in getting his way. But I still feel like he's in a pretty good spot, and I don't feel like he's being targeted in the same way that Mickey or Morgan are. So that's why I still went with Zach above them. But it's the fact that he's not really getting his way this week that leaves him behind here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother 27 at this current point is Ava. Now, I'll be honest, I think Ava has a similar issue to Zach in that the fact that she's still not very active in the house. I wish we saw more of her actually doing things. However, the main reason I have her above Zach is I feel like she does get her way this week, where I do feel like Ashley staying off the block and Adrian going up instead is probably better for Ava's position compared to Zach, and considering that she wasn't really actively pushing for that as much as Zach would have wanted Ashley to go up, I feel like that's probably more of a positive for Ava and not as big of a negative there. But beyond that, I feel like Ava's also picked up some pieces along the way where she has built the final 2 with Rachel. I feel like that's a pretty big boon to her game, and I feel like that could kickstart her game and her to start to play more strategically there. But I feel like on top of that, also targeting Vince, I feel like that's also pretty good for her as well. I feel like the fact that Ava's now onto Vince as well, I think that could definitely lead to her like making a bigger move down the road. That would put her in a pretty good spot there. So at this point, I'm feeling pretty good about Ava. She's probably in one of the best positions in the house alongside Zach. But I feel like the fact that Zach blatantly didn't get his way this week and didn't really do much to ensure he got his way. Whereas I feel like Ava has more positives for her game this week, like getting the final 2 with Rachel and picking up more in Vince's game. I feel like those things were enough to give Ava the edge from me for this week, which is why I do have her here at number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps with the channel. Now we'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I'm live streaming the Thursday eviction episode on my channel, so if you want to see my live reaction and like really experience the show with me, feel free to do so. I'm also on Patreon and a V2 membership, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also do it in the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.